Seattle should be known as the city that proudly cannot stand itself, because that would be a fitting way of describing, among other things, the centrality of their role in the death of the ceasefire. Israel has gone back to bombing tent cities in Gaza, and Seattle is to blame. They're the ones that gave us this coalition of sandbaggers. To understand the death of the ceasefire, you don't have to look very far. You just have to go through some Judge Advocate General episodes. Find the man who was conventionally of military honor. And somebody says to him, better to love and to lose than never to love at all. He looks at them with grim patience and says, have you ever tried it? Seattle is the place where I saw the Broadway musical Hair for the second time. I saw it when it was running on its Broadway tour. And in Pittsburgh at a place called the Nixon Theater. And it's also where the Rave Massacre took place. Now, notice that the Gaza atrocity began with the Rave Massacre. So who was responsible for the Seattle Rave Massacre? It was a MAGA type. So we have to consider the possibility that Hamas was working with the MAGA control switchboard and that they wanted to open Gaza to annihilation for the real estate plans of Nosferatu and the Trump ruppets to come. And Biden was amenable to this because he is a psychotic who had long voted Reagan and for Iraq and taken his votes from fidelity to the veterans and foreign wars of questionable merits. So what is HAIR? HAIR was a choice from the MK Ultra program. You can either be drafted to go to Vietnam or you can be drafted into human trafficking syndicates. But one way or another, you're going to strip down and let MASH doctors examine your genitals. That was the situation, scary situation in the 60s and 70s. Now everybody remembers the cause célèbre of the AIDS scroll, Leslie Katz, because Jimmy Carrere was a creepy, clingy ex-boyfriend who was obsessed with her rejection. What happened was all of the parochials and the people who could hear and the people who were recognized for their standing among peers, not these drummed out, marginalized crybabies who were deaf, that the Jewish community was giving special education to, like gassing them and setting up gas chambers and exploiting their inability to protect their sister. They had a word for my sister. It's a special word for when you use a woman. And they said that the virtue was to let go, not to form ties, not to form lasting bonds. Well, this is a complex situation because what they really were saying was, I'm a better man. I'm more laid back. She wants to sleep with me, not you. And so you push him away. It was like a fight over a wave on the beach. And they had crocodile stories. God, you wouldn't believe the crocodile stories they made up to get that redheaded girl. Robert Fripp was calling me a rapist. A girl I dated 2 years was still a virgin. He was calling me a rapist because he dropped his pick one day, and that proved it to the Swami Nosha of the Gurdjieff Society. And Yoko Ono was making up these stories about how I was to blame for the death of John Lennon and Roger Waters was going to cut my queerball head off. They're still at it, threatening me with this stuff. So they make up all these stories and say, I'm the better good man. Well, written into the script of Hair was a little bit of distance on the subject of just you have to let her go or you're not man enough. Stop taking your fucked upness out on you're fucked up. Take your fucked upness out on Matt Marcus, who burns girls' arms gangrenous with pokers from a fireplace from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. That's not fucked up. So you get your head screwed on. That's yoking knees propriety. Okay. And Hair, the movie Hair, Easy to Be Hard, is a sad story of an abandoned woman. And the conventional virtue of the honor code between men and women, particularly in military sex, is that's sex with a CTS, is that you stand by, you choose one woman, you get married, you have raised a family, you stand by her to death you part. And that's traditional fundamentalism, not the racket of, bully pulpit, behind the scenes blowjobs, the stuff that really goes on in choppy tune fundamentalism. So they're rivals over this girl, and there's this script, and they all want to control the interpretation of the script. So they have Seattle and the Sandbaggers, Brian Becker, all the deadly left-wing hooligans. And they say, we're going to ignore that Leslie Katz was central to the script because Oliver Stone's giving us a big, corrupt bribery contract to get the money. And they all say that it's all about the money. Even when they say it's not about the money, it's about the money. They're helping John Schulman rip off the museums, frame me for reckless driving. And Ken Crimson has a real high stakes with Fripp dropped his pick, so that means Leslie's virginity proves that Jimmy's a rapist. Real high stakes stuff, and could have saved John Lennon. Reagan didn't know. They get the Penguins, we'll rape Jeannie in Pittsburgh, And that's what they do. That's how they operate. So you get these Green Party attaches who set it up to say, we don't know any of that stuff. None of that stuff happened. So we don't have to interpret what Sinwar means. Why would someone named Sinwar coordinate, as my father would say, a MAGA-type rave massacre with an attending Ripper murder to demolish Gaza? Because the MAGA type who destroyed the rave scene was in sympathy and kilter with the idea that there should be a war on sin. So you shouldn't be cheering rave massacres, but the ultimate objective of the rave massacre was to get the Gaza rave, the Arab Spring crowd, completely crushed. And Seattle pretends like I didn't come to them and tell them. From the 90s all through the 2000s, for 30, 40 years, this crowd in Israel is committing abomination. They pretend like they don't know what I'm talking about. There's a trail of tears that goes back to the 80s. 70s, in 79, when I hitchhiked from Pittsburgh to St. Louis in desperation to flag down Robert Fripp for a high five because I missed his show in Pittsburgh because I was misled as to the date. Who was I trying to? I went down to West Virginia to get an Israeli kid who was one of my close friends, to come up to Pittsburgh, and we got the date wrong. I said, well, I'm going to go out to St. Louis and see it. And famous postcard and stuff. This kid helped out with the tape that the postcard was about. He says, tremulous cadence. And his sister, Dolly, is a partner of Sean Strub. Nothing is more clearly evidence that they were with Gail Burst and then that she's a partner of Sean Strupp. He was outside the Dakota. And Yoko Ono has bonded with these people and said, shh, because they're in the San-Bagri-La. And they go marching into the streets and they I don't know that they defend Homs. I don't want to say that. They certainly defend Gaza, and that's good. That's important. But the special intelligence squads make it look like the Palestinians of Gaza attacked, because their metaphor is that the rave had it coming. The rave in Seattle had it coming. What's the difference between the rave in Seattle, who had it coming because of their libidos, their higher order of morality, their ability to let go, that makes them so admired by people like Matt Marcus. Oh, we admire people who have the self-control to let go. You know, do you remember, you think I'm making this up, do you remember the David Bowie musical video of the guy who's like scaling the building to get an autograph for his girlfriend, and the rock star makes off with his girlfriend? This is what they're up to. Okay, this is the Diamond Dogs crowd. And that's what the game they were playing with Leslie Katz was to profile me as a squish. And they got away with it because they have the Sang-Bagri-La, who ignored, they swept away the rave massacre. The people who died in the rave, it's documented, many of these people were killed by the Israeli IDF forces who were in their zeal were just blowing up elder cars. Many of the hostages were killed. What you're talking about is a machine on high that doesn't have loyalty to the masses. They don't care who gets killed. They don't care who they hurt. They don't care who they do wrong. They just want to clean house, get Gaza into a resort, clear everybody out, get them out by Friday. And the sandbaggers in the so-called left will never acknowledge that they had a chance to stop Israel right away by saying, Jimmy is deaf and that is suspicious. These letters about making Jimmy deaf are suspicious. The fact that he's running around to places like St. Louis as a high school kid to talk to Robert Fripp is an indication that he knows something is wrong. We should pay attention to these creepy people advocating for the Green Party and Joseph Goebbels on Mount Desert Island, who are talking about injecting the human race to transform it, and then running AIDS operations. But the San-Bagri-La says, no, we will infect you, buddy boy, because we're open mic bullies, and if you want our attention, you have to die because you're white. And they think that this is 60s stuff. They poison me in the eye, they poison me in the mouth. I mean, they constantly berate me with AIDS. I was a medical library clerk in 1984, and I noticed that from my experience where a barn was burned and it spooked the horses and the horses ran back to the burning barn, I knew that could happen. Human behavior. I said, they're scaring these poor queers. We have to try to warn them. And they got the queers to attack me by this weird shell game about John Lennon. And you blame me for looking up the filmmakers who were involved in planning the Stubble Cross? That John Lennon appeared to have known about it? Do you blame me for tracing the origins of Hollywood and the cinema system back to Houdini? That Dan Rather, like what you would rather believe, says the exact opposite of what he sees in this opera film. Do you blame me for being indignant when girls named Noelle and Paige, one of whom was very frail, had her arm burned gangrenous with a hot poker from a fireplace. Seattle blames me for getting angry about that. They say, no, you shouldn't be angry. You should supplicate and prove your by opening your mouth and accepting a new bacteriological queer ball. Seattle is the city that is proud to not be able to stand itself. It's an unbelievable madhouse who refuse to look at the fact that virginity does not prove rape. The opposite it proves. They can't get it through their stinking heads. They're so stupid. It's absolutely impossible to believe it. And yet, in their cunning, they have gotten Gaza bombed yet again, heartlessly. And where are they? Out on the streets protesting. Wow, that's neat, man. Wow, that's neat. That's neat. Wow, man, that's neat. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Wow, man. Wow, man. Neat. Just neat. Wow, man. Yeah, that's neat.